Hey, what's up everybody? It's Dan Pickett here at Launch Academy, here to bring you another episode of the HTML show. And today we're gonna basically take a deeper look at that first, what we're calling episode index page, make sure we clean it up and get it looking great on mobile displays. And then I wanna also be thinking about how we're going to make it look wonderful on a desktop display. So we're gonna basically take a deeper dive into the details and nuance of that design and make sure that our HTML and CSS really complies with that design. So let's dive in. If you remember, we basically used the foundation framework as a means to essentially build a responsive block grid for the episode listing. And we've got a pretty solid looking website just to start based on where we are. But I want to introduce some tweaks that are going to help us make this look even better as we progress. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that on a small screen, there's a little bit of more division and definition between each of the episodes. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually incorporate a media query so that we get a nice border on all of our episodes. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to go into our app.css and we're going to go into where our episode listing is, and we're going to say media. And the way Foundation is set up is that for widths below 640 pixels, I believe, is going to define a small screen. We can actually look that up in the documentation. So small is going to be any screen. So at 640 pixels is that first breakpoint to medium. So we're going to set our min width there. And then for our episode listing, we're going to set a border bottom that's consistent with that 5px solid gray border that we have going. We'll see how that looks. That's quite ugly, so that's not going to work. We've got some more work to do here. So let's take a look at what we have for our border bottom on our H3 here. Border bottom 1px. Okay, so 5 pixels is just way too strong of a border here. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually introduce a little bit of white space. And we're going to do that actually regardless of the media query. And we're going to say that we want a margin bottom of roughly 20 pixels. And that's going to give us a nice little division. And if you notice, when we get rid of the breakpoint and we hit that 640 pixel trigger, that border will go away, which is great. Awesome. Okay. And what I want to do is I actually only want that border to take place not on the full width of the display here. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to define an HR tag. We're going to leave all of that the way that we want. And then for our HR, we're going to set something like this. And then that means that we have additional markup to add for each of our items here, which isn't really ideal. I'm trying to think if there's a better approach here. For now, I think that that's the approach that I want to use. So we're going to add an HR element to each of the items. And this is basically going to allow us to make that rule look a little more inset, which is my objective here. So see how that looks inset now? And then I can actually set padding on that HR to, let's say, 2.0 REMs. Let's see how that affects things. So now it should be even further in there. And let's bump that up to maybe 20 REMs. Now see how that's adding to the white space? That's not ideal. That's because we're using a border box including padding. So we actually want to set a margin. And that margin's probably way too high. So there we go. Now we've got a nice little divider that kind of mimics what we've included here in this overview. And what we want to do is, as this expands, we want to make sure that it goes away, which it does. Awesome. Okay, so that's a neat little enhancement. Cool. And then we also, taking the design into consideration, we want to add a little white space between the introductory text and the image. So we're going to basically add a margin bottom on our overview section here. Margin bottom. And we should actually have that mimic what we did for the masthead. So that looks like it was 2 REMs, so let's go ahead and mimic that. And there we go, we've got some additional white space. Okay, great. And then the sort of the last component that we want to consider as part of our mobile design is that we need to incorporate this load more button. And I want that load more button to be rather large on a mobile display so it's super easy to click. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some additional markup here. I'm going to create a new row. And I'm going to create that button. What's the exact language? When you're copying a design, if there's defined language, it's a good idea to incorporate it. Load more. And then we're going to also have an icon. I think that's a caret down. FA caret down, I think, is what we're going to want to use from the Font Awesome library. Let's see how that looks. Interesting. All right, so that's Foundation's default button settings that it's doing there. And what we want to do is we want to actually set a column here. And we're going to also set this to be view more. And let's see how this renders. Okay. And what we want to do is we want to essentially isolate that element. And we're going to actually have it occupy 100% of its available width. We're going to make the color that aqua color. And we're going to make the background color none. And we want to make sure that we're overriding the foundation settings that are being applied to this. So we've got to create a more specific selector here. So see, these are the foundation styles, and then the styles that I'm defining. Button view more. So let's just make sure we've got that right. Oh, that's not on the button, that's on the class itself. So we've got to move this outside of the anchor tag itself, because that's the container element. There we go. All right, so we're making a little bit of headway. We've got to make that background color in line with that aqua. So we can't use none because we have to override the foundation selection there. So we've got to use the light blue color. And then we've got to reintroduce the border. And it actually looks like we're using a little bit stronger of a border. That's probably too strong. Oh, where's my border? Ah, we've got to match the color here, not the background color. That is way too much border. That's probably too much too. Maybe 2 pixels is the right call. That's looking better. And then we add a little font weight. And that's looking pretty good. Now, what we want to do is, as this expands outward, we obviously don't want that button to look that way. But we're going to go all the way back up to the top and start thinking about our breakpoints. We've kind of completed our mobile first design. And now we've got to adjust it so that at 640 pixels, it looks great. And that's sort of the next threshold, according to Foundation, in terms of tablet displays and resolution. So we're just going to make sure that our page looks decent with such a setting. And we can already see here, there's a little bit of an alignment issue here. We may decide that we want our titles to be center aligned, which I don't know aesthetically. I think it looks decent this way. Well, let's try it. So what we can do is inside our episode, we can try a text align center and see what that looks like for mobile displays. Notice that our absolute positioning actually creates a problem and a headache for us there. Unforeseen consequence, which can happen often when we're kind of tweaking things. I actually really like it centered here in this display, so I think we'll keep that. But we have to figure out how to accommodate this button and make sure that that button is doing exactly what it needs to do. So what we're going to do is ensure that that button shows up over the image here. And I'm trying to think of how we would do that. So let's take a look at the markup that we have. So we've got this icon overlay that is placed alongside the image. And this is positioned absolutely according to the specification that we have here. So what we need to do is we need to actually have that consider the text alignment. So what we could do is we could actually specify relative positioning and basically say where it's supposed to show up, and then adjust the top to accommodate the height of the actual icon. So that's probably the best way to go. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say we wanna push this up, essentially the height of the element. So we're gonna say, we can push it up 75 pixels. That's too high. So let's push it up 50 pixels. That's too low. There we go. So now that, it's still not sizing the way we want it to size. So unfortunately, I think what that means is for the actual episode thumbnail, we actually need to text align left and back out some of our changes here. So we're gonna go back to absolute positioning. And this works because this is sort of that has the most width responsively on the page. So that should be okay. And what we want to do is we want to essentially make it so that the margin of that episode listing is auto. So we can use auto margin to help us out here. So where's our episode thumbnail? See if that does the trick for us. It doesn't. So just going back to that 340 pixel display, we really want to position this in the center. So this kind of opens up a new can of worms for us. We may have to go back to left alignment until we can come up with a better solution for getting this to show up in the center of the screen. And the offending piece is really this absolutely positioned play bar. So it may be a function of just needing another container here. Again, this is kind of some of the experimentation that we have to do often. But for our purposes, we're just going to move on with a left justification. So we're going to get rid of this center text align and stick with this for now. Okay, so what we can do to accommodate sort of a wider display here is we could responsively adjust this width so that our screen overlay gets a little bit bigger as we kind of trip over a certain breakpoint. So if we're on a tablet that maybe exceeds 400 pixels, well, we'd want to make an image that it kind of goes along with that right up until it breaks. So what we can do is we can stretch that image just a little bit to make that white space a little less painful to deal with. So let's say at, because it's 640, we're going to get that row 2. So right around 500 or so, we'd probably want to make that image a little bit larger. So what we can do, using a media query, we can set the width of that item to we want to really do this for in between 400 pixels and So let's see how this renders. So we actually want to isolate that image. We're expanding the image. And you see how we're stretching out that image now. So that's looking a lot better, a lot better. So you can see how our image is kind of being modified for larger displays. And then when we break into 640, we should get that 2-up grid. So I'm gonna actually change this to be 639 and make sure we get the intended result, which we do. So you see that trip point where basically the large image becomes 2 small images. So that's a nice little tweak. So you can see how we can use media queries to make some small and subtle changes here to improve the user experience based on the display that we're dealing with. So we just used a media query to basically create sort of a better image experience here. And then lastly, what we probably want to do is make this load more button look better when we're on a larger display. So let's go ahead and make that a smaller icon when we go beyond that 640 pixels. So we're going to go back down to that button and set a media query. And again, this media query, I think, based on the Foundation docs, is for 650. We'll do it for 640 pixels and larger. So we're going to basically say width auto for the view more button. And let's see what that looks like. Great. So now what we need to do is we need to text align center for the view more section. And there we go. We're in compliance with the design. Maybe add a little more padding. What do we have for padding on the button itself? So we'll do 0.5 REM, and then lots of padding on the left and the right. How's that looking? I think we need more padding vertically. And we're pretty well in compliance there. So we're ready to move on to the next page. Join me then, and we will tackle the video detail screen. Thanks. Bye-bye.